Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's webinar with Tristram Hooley. My name is Marina. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Hope you're well. Hope you're well, and hopefully everyone's dealing with this tricky time as they can. Before I hand over to Tristram, I just would like to briefly explain how the webinars work. If you haven't taken part in our webinars before, please leave your questions in the question box, and also all our webinars will be recorded, so if you would like to share this webinar with your colleague, please feel free to do that. That is it from me. All yours, Tristram.
Great. Okay, well, thank you to one of our biggest ever audiences. I'm going to be talking about some research that we did at the ISE, which was looking at the kind of immediate impacts of the COVID-19 situation. So I'm going to present some of those things to you today and also give you a few other bits of data as well. So the survey ran between the 13th and the 20th of March. We received 124 valid responses from employers, and the survey was focused on how employers were dealing with recruitment and development, and how that process was being changed by COVID-19. It needs to be understood very much as a snapshot in time. Things have moved on quite a bit since then. So since the survey's closed, the lockdown has tightened and become sort of an official policy, which it wasn't when we were doing the survey. Schools and colleges have closed. Universities have moved to online teaching. There's been sort of disease running through the government, and so the Prime Minister, the Health Secretary, and other key members of the government have tested positive for it. So this is really very much a fast-moving situation. So our data, I think, gives us some really good indications of what ways it's going. I'm going to finish up by telling you some of the sort of things that we've been hearing from some of our employer conversations since the survey closed. So just to look at COVID-19 cases in the UK, we can see that things have been going up pretty rapidly over the last couple of weeks. Now, there is some indication based on one of the government's sort of leading scientists, so from Neil Ferguson from Imperial, that the progress of the disease might be slowing down. But for now, at least, there's still pretty substantial numbers of new cases being identified every day, and deaths and so on are rising. So this is still very much a serious and ongoing situation. So what I'm going to look at is, based on our data, what was it that employers told us was happening. I'll try and work through a number of different areas. So looking at working practices, looking at recruitment, development, hiring, and then I'm going to finish up by saying something about some of the wider implications of what we've found, and link it to some other data as well. So let's start with working practices. There's probably nothing particularly surprising in this. We probably asked the questions a little differently than we would do if we were asking them today. But it was clear, even at the point at which we conducted the survey, that people were moving their meetings online, they were starting to work from home, they were reducing travel and ceasing attending events and so on. So we would probably say that now this is pretty much locked down. Now, obviously not 100% of people are working from home now. There are still people in the office, but very large numbers of people are now working pretty much exclusively from home. And that is obviously, interesting from the point of view of how's our working life changed. But from the point of view of running a recruitment process, it means that a lot of processes are going to have to be re-engineered. So if we move on to look at that, what we can see is that employers have been very substantially shifting their recruitment approaches. So broadly, we've got sort of two categories here. So we've got things that where employers are pretty much cancelling them. So the stuff in pink is cancelled. And what you'll see with this, why this is a bit of a wiggly line on the far end of this graph, is that some people are doing more than one thing. So they might be cancelling some things, but also delivering others online or by telephone. So some of these bars add up to more than 100. But in general, the pattern is where people were doing face-to-face stuff with universities or with schools or with education in general, they're pretty much cancelling that. They're shifting a little bit of it online, but most part that's cancelled. Where we're looking at things which are selection processes, so assessment centres, face-to-face interviews, that kind of thing, we start to see things which are more likely to be being shifted online. Now, there's a bit of variety in both of those, but broadly what we're seeing is those attraction and marketing things that people were doing face-to-face, pretty much they're cancelling them. Often they have other online mechanisms for attracting candidates. However, when you're moving to selection, what people are doing is shifting stuff online. So if we look at what that looks like, we've got a couple of quotes here. So one of our employers said, as of last week, all of our face-to-face interviews have been moved to virtual format. We're in process of amending our assessment centre format and have suspended those planned for the next 2 weeks whilst we plan. So that's a very typical response. So they've recognised we can't do face-to-face selection processes anymore. We're going to have to shift, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to do that. So we'll start to see that happening. Another example here from a different employer is saying that we need to move the group exercise elements of assessment centres. They need to remove that element. So some offers will be made without candidates having completed that interview. And again, I think there's two messages in that. The first is that there are some things that are not so easy to move online and employers are struggling to do that. But the second thing is that this issue around group exercises and interactions between candidates, which is a very common part of assessment processes, particularly assessment centres, is one of the things that people are finding most difficult. And hearing from employers talking since, we can hear that people are using various kinds of technologies to set up those activities in a different way. But obviously that requires some substantial thinking about how you set up that assessment centre and make it robust and so on. If we move on to the development, so what are you doing for your existing hires? By and large, the picture is quite similar for graduates and for non-graduates, and people are really trying not to cancel their learning and development programs. So what they are doing is some are continuing as planned, but the largest proportion, the plurality, are changing the way they deliver it. So moving more of those learning and development programs online. Of course, people are delaying it, and then there's this very large chunk of people who say they're not sure yet. And that's really one of the patterns right through this data that we've done, is that while some employers have made some quick decisions to, for example, stop doing certain things because you can't do them face-to-face, most of them haven't made final decisions about how their recruitment is going to work for the rest of the year. And that's really this idea that it is a very rapidly moving process. Now, some people talk about this. There are some upsides. So one employer here says, we'll use this as an opportunity to pilot more virtual approaches. For example, we undertake 6 monthly one-to-one face-to-face catch-ups with our graduates in all UK locations. We'll now do that by phone or Jabber or video conference, and then test the feedback. And this could help us to save travel costs and carbon emissions, which we've been coming under some pressure to do in any event. Again, this is quite a common message that we're hearing from quite a lot of people. Many employers have been seeking to move a variety of their processes into a more online form for quite a while. This has given them the push to do that, where in those cases where they had the technology and they had the thinking in place, they're able to shift into that. But obviously in other places, they may not have the technology, they may not have thought through how to deliver this online, and so they're still figuring that out. So if we look at hiring now, we can see a number of big changes in terms of hiring. So just to take you back, this is research from prior to the COVID-19 crisis starting up. So this is data that we collected just before Christmas and published just after Christmas from our Pulse survey. And what we were asking was essentially, do you think the student labour market will grow or shrink? And we asked employers that in comparison to what they, how many people are you recruiting this year in comparison to what you recruited last year? What we found was that overall, we were predicting a very small amount of growth in the student labour market from last year to this year. So our estimation, and we got quite a lot of press at the time when we released this data, our estimation was that the graduate and non-graduate labour markets were essentially stagnant. So if any small changes happened, it would be very easy for it to slip into shrinkage. So that's got to be understood against the background of a graduate labour market that's been growing fairly steadily over the last, say, 5 years. So for it to level off was not a problem. But we weren't obviously expecting that we would have a major crisis of this kind that would happen so quickly. So I introduced this just because it gives us a benchmark of where student recruitment was at, which is essentially stable. We were expecting that, all things being equal, probably this year people were going to recruit slightly more or about the same number as they recruited last year. However, obviously we know that the crisis has happened. And so we then went out a couple of weeks ago and we said, is your hiring going to change as a result of COVID-19? Now, the plurality here are saying, and we asked for graduates, non-graduates, interns and placement students, but the plurality in all cases are saying, as planned, we're going to carry on as planned. But hardly anyone is saying they're going to increase or substantially increase. But quite a substantial chunk are saying that they're going to see a slight decrease. So that prediction that we had, that the graduate labour market was going to stay stable, based on the changes of hiring that we're seeing from COVID-19, seems wrong. But there's also another really important figure here, which comes back to that idea of the don't knows. So we've got a very large chunk of employers who a couple of weeks ago were saying that they didn't know what was going to happen. They weren't sure whether they were going to increase, decrease, or recruit as planned. Now, many of them may now be sort of rethinking their processes and maybe moving into the slight or substantial decrease side. So I think we can probably say that we're likely to see a decrease in the overall size of the student labour market this year in comparison to last year. At the moment, we're still not able to quantify how big that decrease will be. And based on this data, we would probably say that it's going to be a relatively slight decrease. But some of the messages that we've been hearing from employers since would want us to flag some risk with that change. Now, just to give you an idea of scale, in 2008, so when we had the big financial crash, we saw the graduate labour market, and we only collected data on graduates at that point, we saw the graduate labour market decrease in size by about a quarter amongst ISE members. Now, in fact, most graduates in that case continued to work. They just didn't necessarily get the jobs at the sort of the elite end of the graduate labour markets. They didn't get these the kind of best jobs, which are the ones that really the ISE tends to monitor most closely because of the kind of membership that we have of large employers who run these formal schemes. In fact, graduate unemployment didn't go up hugely. It did go up a bit, but didn't go up hugely. And most of those people found jobs elsewhere in the labour market. So, but just to give you that idea of scale, is that we, in that period, which is the most sort of substantial period of recession that we've seen in recent years, we saw the size of the market drop by a quarter. Based on this finding, where people are saying there's a slight decrease, we would probably say it's going to be a little bit less, but the situation has moved on rather more since then, and we may be looking at something more in that sort of territory. We also are not sure how the rest of the labour market will hold up, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. So one of the things that doesn't come through that strongly in that data that I've just shown you, but certainly we've been picking up a lot since, and this is a quote from the survey, is the idea of the loss of summer internships. So one of our employers here says the programs most at risk of change and possible postponement or even cancellation are summer internships, with those due to start at the end of June. Although we hope to continue as normal, we're also contingency planning for other scenarios, We've frozen making any further offers onto the summer internship program due to the risk. Now, as the length of the likely lockdown has become clear, many more employers have started to reduce their summer internships. And from listening to employers, I think we would expect that many summer internships will be cancelled. Some of them might be moved into some kind of virtual online placement, but many employers are saying that in this difficult time, they don't necessarily have the capacity to supervise summer interns. So if we were thinking about an immediate impact, then it's definitely going to be on these areas of short-term summer internships. So again, we've got this fact that many of our employers are still figuring this out. And so one says at the moment, we're probably still 2 or 3 weeks away from knowing. We're still budgeting to recruit graduate roles on a similar volume to previous years. But with everyone working from home for the foreseeable, this causes challenges with entry-level roles in terms of inducting and starting new, training new starters. And so, and they say then that the likelihood is that entry-level roles will be delayed until we're back in the office environment, hopefully recruiting a similar volume to those originally planned. And this gives us, I think, 2 of the competing rationales that are going on. So firstly, we've got short-term logistical problems, which is we may not be able to find the people, we may not be able to interview them, and then ultimately we may not be able to induct them and start training them. And that is going to prevent us appointing as many people as we perhaps originally thought. And then we've also got this slightly bigger issue, which is, okay, we were planning to recruit these people, but maybe the economic situation has changed. And maybe some of the people who we were planning to recruit, even if we can logistically deal with them, we may still end up in a position where we don't appoint them. So there are a number of things going on in the labour market that we're trying to watch pretty closely. Now, our membership is not primarily SMEs, but we opened this survey up and we did get a few responses from SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises. This is one that is particularly worrying. It comes from an SME who says there's no work coming in at all. 2 people we took on who were in probationary period have both agreed happily to have their pay stopped until this is open. For SMEs, this crisis is far more acute in the public sector. And I think by that we could take also for larger employers as well. Now, since that's been announced, we've had the various announcements from governments about how they're going to underpin pay and allow staff to be furloughed with government funding, which will hopefully make the situation for these people better. But the issues for SMEs are quite clearly going to be bigger and more immediate than they are for large firms. And that raises some issues about whether, if large firms do reduce the intake of young people, they may well run into issues where the SMEs or other firms are not able to soak up that excess number of students. And so that could be a difference, the way things played out in 2008. Now, there's some really interesting data published by EMSI here, which and they've got a webinar as well, so I'd really advise going to their website and having a look at that. They've been doing some really interesting work here, but what they've been monitoring here is the overall drop in the number of vacancies that are posted online. So the number of job adverts that are out there have fallen very dramatically and in a fairly inverse proportion to the number of cases that we've seen in COVID-19. And so this is, I think, obviously a very worrying situation, but not a surprising one, that as well as the decisions that we're talking about, which are structured a more medium term about the number of recruits that are going to be picked up by large firms as part of formal student and graduate intakes, we're also seeing an overall drop in the number of jobs advertised. Now, this could be short term, it could be related to those logistical reasons that I've already talked about, that people don't necessarily know how to recruit, select and then induct new staff in this period. But it could also relate to longer term concerns about the economic situation of firms more generally. And that's certainly borne out by some of the information that we have more widely. So this is a Guardian report from today, which is talking about a new report that's come out from an economic organisation, and they say coronavirus is forecast to cut the UK's economic output by 15%. And really the question for all of this is both how deep is that recession going to be, and also how long is it going to be? And I think what everybody is hoping is that we have what some people have described as the V-shaped recession, which is the economy was going on relatively okay prior to this crisis. It's had a massive drop, but once that drop is at the end, that we start to come out of it very quickly. I think probably increasingly economists are saying that that's a bit less likely, and that the impacts of this particular crisis are likely to be more structural and more long-term. So let's think about some of the implications here. So we're still very much at the beginning of this crisis. It's amazing how quickly things have moved. But if we think about short-term impacts to start with, so face-to-face attraction has largely ceased. Selection is moving online. Summer internships have ceased or are ceasing. Medium-term impacts are that in September, the graduate and apprentice numbers are still rather unclear, and it's likely to have a reduction from last year. Much will depend how long the restrictions stay in place as to how serious that is. And over the long term, a wider economic downturn is possible. And if this happens, it could have impact not just on hiring numbers for this year, but also for next year as well. So it should be 2021 and 2022 as well. So the COVID-19 crisis is driving change in the way the student labour market is working. Firms are shifting online, and we're seeing new ways of working emerging, some very, very rapidly. But there is, I think, still an impending crisis for young people entering the workforce this year and possibly next year as well. And on top of this, there is a danger of recession. So the government is acting, but it's likely to need to do more as we move forwards. So for more information, you can download the full report that this is based on from our publications page, along with all the other reports that the ISE have produced. There's also a podcast of me talking about this with Stephen Isherwood if you're interested in podcasts. And we're looking to quickly start to produce a regular weekly or regular bulletin on COVID-19 and what's going on. So I will hopefully be posting that on the website over the next day or two, our first one of those bulletins, and we will have more information for you. So please keep watching this space. We're working very hard at ISE to keep on top of some of the details of this situation and to keep inputting and informing employers, universities and suppliers about this. So that's my details. If you want to get in touch with me, then you can do so by just emailing me. But otherwise, I hope you found some of this interesting, and I would be very happy to take some questions if people have got any questions.
Yes, thank you, Tristram. We do have already a few questions lined up, and we have 446 people joining this session. So if you do have any questions, please leave them in the question box, and we will go through as many as we can. So the first question is from Saida. Hi, Tristram. Very much our experience above with the employers cancelling physical events. Any indication on whether there is a leaning to shift everything online, or are employers waiting and seeing and will make a call in the next few weeks, months? PS, this is on-campus engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be a mix. I mean, I think this year much of the sort of recruitment, the attraction side of the recruitment process has probably already been done. So probably that's not the biggest pressure on employers right now. I would have thought that it would be worth universities getting in place processes for that to start happening in September and beyond, really, because we don't know when this is going to be finished. And even if the sort of immediate restrictions are let up, then it may well still be that not everybody is willing or able to travel all around the country to do that. So yeah, I think there's definitely a strong case for starting to set that up. I'm sure employers will be very happy to participate in online forms of, you know, careers fairs, employer talks, these kinds of things. I think we're all getting our processes in place for that.
Thank you. Georgina of Open University asks, has any organizations managed to run group exercises online? And what does this look like so we can inform our students?
Yeah, so we have, I mean, we've been having regular meetings with groups of employers where they've been talking about that. People are using a variety of technologies, but they're doing, you know, things like using Zoom as a technology to deliver that kind of thing, but also some more sophisticated things where, for example, you can group students, put them off in separate rooms, you know, virtual rooms effectively, to allow small groups to work together and then present back to larger groups and that kind of thing. So yeah, we are starting to see some really some use of kind of e-learning type technologies and more bespoke recruitment technologies to do that. But essentially what people are trying to do by and large is to replicate what they used to do face-to-face online using sort of video conference type technologies.
Great, thank you. Georgina asks, are you intending to run another survey in a few weeks to see what may have changed?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously looking at all sorts of different ways to collect data. We are trying to kind of gather intelligence in multiple ways. I think it's very, very possible that we will do another survey, but obviously it depends on how this situation develops. I think we won't be doing one over the, you know, we won't be doing anything before Easter, for example. I guess after Easter we might have another look and see how long this is likely to go on and whether a new survey would be useful. But yeah, I think it's very possible.
Perfect. Alex is wondering, were there any interesting examples of innovation in recruitment from the survey?
Yeah, I mean, lots of employers are doing lots of innovative things. I mean, I sort of flagged a couple of examples, but people are definitely moving stuff online. They're using a mixture of, I suppose, what we might call sort of replacement. So instead of doing certain things face to face, you're finding something else, so finding some other mechanism to test that competency that you're interested in testing, to do that online. Or people are looking to essentially replicate things online, and some things replicate relatively easily. So for example, interview processes, it's relatively easy to set that up as an online thing instead of a face-to-face thing. So I think what to me, more than sort of really spectacularly innovative things, I think the innovation has come more in the speed in which people have been shifting their processes across. And you know, so we're seeing firms really, I think if the only issue was not physically meeting, I think we would be able to see many firms get back to a kind of business as usual situation fairly quickly. Obviously, that's not the only issue. The logistical issues are not the only issue that we're dealing with.
Thank you. Angela asks, is there any data on how the public sector benefited from the previous recession? For example, we know that teacher training recruits increased during times of recession.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're in a slightly different situation because in the last recession, we also dealt with the policy that's often described as austerity. So we didn't see a very large increase in investment in the public sector. What is definitely true is that when there were less jobs elsewhere, then some of those things like teaching and so on attracted a higher number of recruits or a higher number of applicants than they otherwise would have been able to do. What is going to be interesting in the next period is that it may well be that this government will take a different economic approach and try to invest in the public sector as a way to pick up employment. And so that will be a different kind of way of dealing with it. And if that was the case, it may be that some of the slack in employment is picked up by the public sector, but that is still very much remains to be seen, because I think everything we've seen so far has been very much short-term crisis management rather than a long-term sort of new economic approach.
Thank you. Next question. Have you done any analysis on the international student retention numbers in the UK and how these may be affected?
No, I'm afraid we haven't looked at that specifically. There are other organisations that might have looked at that. I mean, we'd be very interested. If you hear anything, then please pass it our way.
Another question from Georgina. How are employers reacting to exams being cancelled, and are they still offering positions due to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear how universities are going to handle this. Employers are very concerned about it. They're probably more concerned about GCSE and A-level results, but yes, they would like an answer to that. What we've heard on GCSE and A-levels is that the Ofqual, so the government's agency, will come up with a clear statement of how this process is going to work by Easter. I think employers will be very reassured if universities were able to come up with a similar statement on a similar kind of time scale. So be able to say, well, yes, you know, these people will graduate and this is how we will handle that graduation. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely concerned. It's definitely an issue for them. I suspect it's one of the issues that will be surmountable, but it probably requires action from universities.
Thank you. You've partly answered this question, but David asks, are you planning to conduct similar surveys in the future?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think we are looking to conduct more research on this in the future, depending on how the situation develops.
Perfect. We have a few questions lined up, so I hope you're prepared, Tristram. A question from Claire of respondents. What was the breakdown of private sector versus public sectors and versus third sector organizations?
Yeah, it's mostly private sector. I mean, one of the things that, I mean, I haven't actually got the figures to hand, but one of the things that when you look at the ISE membership in particular, if you look by the number of organizations, the public sector doesn't make up a particularly large part of it. It tends to be private sector organizations. When you look at the overall number of hires, that starts to shift a bit, because you've got some employers in there like the NHS and Teach First and various others that are very large, you know, recruit very large numbers of people. And so, yeah, but in terms of these findings that I've just presented, I think you could assume that they are largely, but not exclusively, private sector companies.
Perfect. Stephanie is wondering which platforms are best for virtual assessment days.
I don't have that information, but certainly if you attend some of the ISE other webinars and things, we're trying to invite suppliers who are providing these kinds of tools. So people are talking about lots of different things. If you're an employer, then we have regular, what we call town halls, where we bring employers together. And I've sat in on a few of those meetings so far, and people really get into some of the details of, yes, I use this system, or no, I use this system, or this one didn't work. And so if you're an employer, absolutely get into those. If you're a university or a supplier and you're interested in what people are using, then we'll try and get some more data out to you, and also to provide a bit of a forum for some of the suppliers to tell what they can do.
Great. Joanne asks, is there a role which universities can play in supporting employers and students with this transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think universities, career services are going to be really important, and universities more widely as well. I think one of the things is that you need to help students to understand what's happening. You need to help them to keep in touch with employers, to recognize that there might be changes in what they are planning. So If you've got students who are dealing with summer internships at the moment or expecting to start a summer internship, then they really need to be in touch with the employers, figure out whether that's still happening. Also recognise that employers don't necessarily have all the answers right now. If we're looking forward to September and students who are either seeking work or who have got an offer already, then again, it's trying to help them to understand that this is a dynamic situation and things might be changing, and to recognise that that's not a personal comment on their own employability or capabilities, but that they need to be in touch with employers and trying to kind of respond to the situation as it moves, really.
Thank you. Question from Jennifer. A quick question regarding posts. When would the next one be, or will you repeat the survey again?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely wouldn't do the exact survey again. We would do, but we might do something that built on it and was more applicable to the kind of how the situation develops. We haven't got direct plans for when we're going to do something new yet, but we'll be in touch. I mean, if you follow the ISE website and Twitter account and LinkedIn, then as soon as there's a new survey out, you'll start to hear about it.
Perfect. Question from Suzanne. Is there any sector-specific information available?
No, we didn't look at sector specifically when we analysed this. I've got no reason to think, and I have done a little bit of digging into the data for people who've asked me these kinds of questions already. I've got no reason to think that this is particularly sector specific. There are some issues which are related to sectors in terms of more long-term impacts. So things like, shifting in the oil price that's happening at the moment is making a difference to certain sectors. So people in engineering and people in energy and so on. There are obviously also some issues about how sectors like retail and so on are particularly being impacted by the crisis. So I'm sure there will be some longer term economic impacts that will differ a bit by sector. But I think in terms of most of what I've been talking about, which is mainly about immediate kind of mechanisms of recruitment and development, and then I don't think there's a lot of sector differences.
Thank you. Next question from Graham. Any ideas about placement years?
Well, I mean, it's difficult because I think again, it's going to be probably easier for firms to cut placement years than it is to cut full-time graduate recruitment. At the moment, depending on the timetable you're working to at the moment, people probably aren't working to that. They're focusing on their immediate problems around summer internships. But I would have thought broadly that placement years follow a similar pattern to overall recruitment, and probably broadly that people cut their placement years before they cut their sort of permanent graduate recruitment, but that is just my instinct rather than something based on the data.
Thank you. Katie asks, we are moving all our in-house internships to remote access, but still recruiting. Why can't graduate employers do the same?
Yes, so there's a couple of things to say on that. So I think there's sort of probably two patterns. So some graduate employers or some employers are absolutely doing what you're describing. So they're saying, well, we were going to have X number of interns, rather than bringing them into our office, well, let's set up some projects for them to do online. I think that the number that do that, especially those that have got large numbers of summer interns, is going to be relatively small. But what we have heard is that many will seek to provide some kind of alternative experience, which will be somewhat less than a full internship. So it might be perhaps access to a mentoring scheme or something like that, or some kind of taster day. But the reason why people are not doing it, especially when they've got large numbers, is it requires substantial amounts of time, often from across their business. And at the moment, there's so much uncertainty in the way that the businesses are going to be going into the beginning of the summer that people are not really wanting to commit to an additional responsibility for that business. But as I say, that doesn't mean that there'll be nothing, and that's why it's important that universities and students are in touch with employers. You know, perhaps after Easter, you know, give them a bit more chance to get to grips with it, but get in touch with employers and figure out what they can offer you and what will still be possible.
Perfect. Debbie asks, do you think work experience opportunities will be the same as internships and be cancelled by employers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of particularly school-based work experience tends to happen either now-ish or towards the end of the term. I think it's pretty unlikely that a lot of work experience is going to go forward. Obviously, work experience covers quite a wide range of things. You know, we've got the T levels, for example, starting next year. So that is going to be different. I think from September, you know, we don't know what's going to be happening, but I think if you were thinking that students have opportunities between now and the summer, I'm not saying all of them will be cancelled. I'm sure some will go ahead and some will find alternative arrangements that will work for you. But I think that area will be at very severe risk.
Got it. Emma asks, did any employers express their concern about the implications for their talent pipeline and future hires with the pause or cancellation of internship programs?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got this so much in the survey, but talking to employers since, obviously it's something that people are worried about. And one of the things that some employers are looking to do is whether, if they had people who they had selected to become interns, whether there's some way that they can automatically bring them in or allow them to skip a stage in their main graduate recruitment, for example. So people absolutely are thinking about that, they're absolutely concerned about that. But at the same time, part of the point of those internships is to give people a chance to impress people and also for them to decide who fits and who doesn't. And that gets a bit more difficult if you don't actually run your internship, obviously. So, but yeah, I think employers are going to be looking at that. One of the things that will set the context for that is how much they think the overall number of hires is going to change. So how confident are they about recruiting large numbers? Because if you're not recruiting anyone, then the talent pipeline is not so immediately critical.
Thank you. Next question, any thoughts about how this might affect those students in lower socioeconomic demographics? Any support to those who don't have access to good and reliable internet?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that people have been worrying about. I don't think we've got very good answers on this yet, but absolutely, I think I've heard employers talking about both sort of lower socioeconomic groups who may not have access to either internet. We could also throw into that pile, we could also say people who are living in rural areas where good internet access is not always readily available to them. And then finally, there's a kind of a group of people who have various kinds of impairments where rapidly developed new mechanisms for managing recruitment may not have the same level of sort of adjustments possible as it would if it was a more kind of long-term process. Employers are absolutely aware of all of these issues. They're very concerned about them. I don't think they've necessarily got very simple or quick answers to them, though.
Thank you. Question from Charlie. Are ISE hearing of offers for September 2020 being deferred?
Yeah, we've heard rumours about that, but not on a large scale. I think most employers are still in the position where they are honouring most of what they have, but the situation is changing quite rapidly. There are going to be areas where the impact might be more substantial. I mean, not to put it too simply, but there are firms like EasyJet has grounded all of its fleet today. I mean, that's going to have major business implications. It will depend on what kind of compensation is available. I think graduate recruitment in that kind of context is not something you can absolutely guarantee to anyone. But no, at the moment, I don't think we could say we've heard of large numbers or large scale reneging on offers by employers. for September start graduate schemes, or later on graduate schemes. It's the summer placement that people are currently kind of dealing with, I think.
Thank you. Helen asks, in terms of the ripple effect of COVID-19 on level 4 and 5 students who are potentially going to suffer, what are your views on the impact of this for their career progression and the impact of graduate outcomes?
Well, I mean, the straightforward answer is that, well, there's a couple of things. There's people who are doing qualifications at the moment. I mean, it seems to me very likely that if you're able to stay in the education system, then many people may make that decision to stay in the education system for longer. But if we're talking about people who are graduating really at whatever level, graduating into a recession can have some long-term scarring effects on your earning potential. So, I mean, and that's nothing, you can't do anything to control that. That's not something that, but it's what we know is that, people who are able to establish their career in boom times can often get on a bit better. So there are definitely issues. At the moment, we're not exactly sure what they will be and where some of the cuts and things will be felt. One of the issues that I've been talking about for a while is that when we were seeing steadily increasing numbers of both graduates and apprentices or non-graduate hires, it always has raised the question to me that if people are going to cut, where are they going to cut from? Are they going to cut from their graduate numbers, or are they going to cut from apprentice or non-graduate numbers? And I don't know the answer to that, but that will be something that I suspect we'll find out over the next year or so.
Thank you. Mark asks, in light of the larger pressures on SMEs in current climate, what what alternative employment routes do you expect graduates will take?
Well, I think what we know is that about a third of graduates, I think something like 34% of graduates work for SMEs. Whether that proportion will change, I mean, I don't know. I think there's too many variables to guess on that at the moment. I think there are a number of possible scenarios, but certainly one of them is that employment in the public sector grows, and it certainly is likely to grow as a proportion if you start to see substantial numbers of unemployed graduates. Now, I mean, I feel like the way these questions are driving, it's driving us down a kind of fairly gloomy view of things, which we don't know yet. I mean, it's still very unclear how this situation is going to move on, and there's absolutely no consensus that we will, hit immediately into a recession and how that recession will pan out. But I think it's worth being aware that is a possibility, and that whereas in the past it may be that reduction of hiring in larger firms was largely soaked up by SMEs, that may not be the way it plays out this time.
Thank you. We still have 10 more minutes for questions, so we will try and go through as many as we can. So the next question is from Emma. Is there a way careers departments to work with employers to share ways we could all work together? This may mean online workshops, talks, etc.
Yeah, I think absolutely all of the above. And I think the other thing is firstly, I suppose it's give employers a little bit of space, because they are figuring this stuff out on a very rapid time scale. But the second thing really is to start to plan more long term. So, don't assume this will all be resolved for September, for October. And so I think that's the sort of thing people should be planning to do. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, work with your employer list, think about how you can, what services you can set up, what are the alternatives to I mean, it will require, I think, first some vision from careers services, both at the graduate and in schools and colleges as well. It requires some vision about what kind of things could you do, which students would engage with, and could allow you to connect students in a meaningful way up with employers. Because I think if you can offer employers opportunities to interact with students, then they will want them. I mean, even if the labour market, even if the size of the graduate labour market or the size of the student labour market declines, employers will still be recruiting some, and many students will kind of carry on and get jobs just fine. So we need to facilitate for that to happen, really.
Thank you. Laura asks, are employers open to speculative applications from students for remote placements?
I doubt it, but I mean, obviously, you know, if you hit the right person at the right time, you might get that. But I think probably the kind of employers that we're generally dealing with in the ISE are usually working. They will if they're interested in delivering summer placement schemes, they will already have one. They will already have recruited people, and they will be looking to manage the experience of the people they've already recruited rather than seeking speculative placements. But you know, I mean, there's very little to lose for students, but I mean, I wouldn't be particularly hopeful about that.
Thank you. John asks, what do you see as the biggest challenge for students in this context?
I mean, I suppose straightforwardly, it's getting a solid toehold into the labour market as quickly as possible, really. And it's going to, I think you're going to have to be very aware of what happens at what point and what restrictions are lifted, and find, I mean, we will hopefully, and careers services will also hopefully start to have insights about which employers might be recruiting people even though they can't bring people in face to face. It may well be that, I mean, Boris Johnson last week said it would be 12 weeks, the lockdown. It may well be it is done in 12 weeks and that things start to return to normal. And so, yeah, students, I think, have just got to be really, I think you've got to be sensitive to the difficulty that employers are going through, and you've got to be aware of some of the changes in the rules and the situations that people are dealing with. But then, you know, as ever, it's trying to look for what opportunities are out there and make the most of them, try and find them where possible.
Perfect, thank you. Question from Philip. Are there examples of sectors that have been hit particularly hard so far, and likewise sectors that are thriving?
I mean, we're not really at that situation yet. I mean, the survey that we did was really at the beginning of this crisis, and what it tells us is that employers were taking it very seriously, and that very quickly, you know, a third of employers, quarter to a third of employers were thinking about cutting some of their numbers. It also told us that you know, again, about a third of them were unclear about what they were going to do, and they were still thinking that process through. I think, you know, we can make some educated guesses about some of the areas where there are likely to be more substantial impacts. So, you know, travel has obviously been very seriously hit, you know, travel and so on. Some aspects of retail have been very seriously hit, firms with large amounts of, you know, shop floors. These are all issues that I don't think we've got particular insights to say that these types of firms are definitely reducing recruitment at a higher rate than everybody else. I think everybody's worried, everybody's figuring it out at the moment.
Thank you. Maya asks, will graduates need to compete more for the jobs there are?
I think probably yes is the answer. I mean, it's thinking about what kind of responses there are out there. I mean, in terms of simply the numbers, we don't know, but it's very likely that there are slightly less or even potentially substantially less graduate jobs this year than there were last year. And in that situation, you would expect that the chance of landing one of the better paid, better supported graduate jobs that are out there is going to get harder. I think absolutely you could anticipate that.
Gotcha, thank you. Alan asks, do you get any sense that the circumstances and the move to more online tools, comms and engagement may be a preferred longer term practice, and should HEI prepares for this?
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, think there's a number of possibilities there. I think it's very difficult to say absolutely. What I think we can say is that many firms, and and it's true also on the educational side as well, many firms have for a while had greater capacity to do things online than they've actually used. People have always liked meeting face to face. It's it's part of the joy of work, isn't it? So so many organizations have unused capacity in terms of online, setting up online recruitment, online meetings, online training, and so on. So this crisis has driven people to use up that capacity, or to make the most of that capacity that they have. Whether that will mean that once the crisis is over, that people switch back to exactly as they were, it seems kind of unlikely that they will. It seems like there might be some increased changes. Probably people have learned how to do things through the crisis that they will continue to do afterwards. How substantial those changes are, so whether, for example, a number of firms abandon assessment centres altogether, which are an expensive way of doing things, and shift to doing things online, we'll have to wait and see with that. I think one of the things that's going to determine it is, firstly, how long the lockdown goes on, and secondly, on whether any of it comes back. So if it looks like, yes, we're out of lockdown, but it may well be that we lock down again, which is what some people have been saying might happen, then it seems very likely that people will be tentative to move stuff back to face that they can do in an alternative way.
Thank you. Next question: what are the proportions of private and public organizations surveyed?
Yes, I've mentioned that already. Really, so this is a majority survey of private sector companies. There are some public sector organisations in there as well. I won't name names exactly, but there are some educational organisations, some government organisations, and so on in there as well. But yeah, largely this is a private sector survey, and if you want to look at it, it pretty much reflects the ISE's membership. So if you look on our website, you can see the kind of composition of our membership.
Thank you. This might be our last question. Presumably non-graduate recruitment apprenticeships will be similar to graduate recruitment, with more online recruitment activities.
Yeah, there's some added complications for apprenticeships, which are about the qualifications that people need to get in order to be admitted onto qualifications, and also the requirement to deliver an apprenticeship program, which requires the provider of that program to be available and open. So I think there will be some added complications as to how that works. I know that many firms ask their apprenticeship providers to do some of their recruitment for them, or at least be involved in their recruitment. But yeah, I mean, I think probably the graduate side of the recruitment will move online quicker, but I think probably there will be fairly similar patterns in terms of graduate and non-graduate recruitment.
Thank you so much, Tristram. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for the questions, but if we haven't answered your query, feel free to get in touch with the ISE, feel free to get in touch with Tristram, and we will carry on. We will keep an eye on the situation and further developments. As mentioned earlier, this session is recorded, so just check our website at the end of the day, and the recording should be available on our website shortly. Tristram, thank you very much for this incredible session. It's been highly engaging.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite a whirlwind of questions, so hopefully I've done as many of them as I can. I suspect we might organise another chat next week or something like that, when we can pick up some more of these things. It seems like it might be useful to people.
Yes, feel free to join our forum. We've created this special forum for this topic, so feel free to engage online, and yeah, as mentioned, please do get in touch with us. That is it for today. Thank you everyone for joining us in, and stay safe.